Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Great Leadership. My guest today, Ali Abdaal. He's the best-selling author of a book that I have here. Look at that lovely book there called Feel Good Productivity, How to Do More of What Matters to You. He is the world's most followed productivity expert on YouTube. He has over 5 million subscribers. I wish we had over 5 million subscribers. So if you're watching this, you can subscribe to our channel. And today we're going to be talking about a few different things from the book. Ali's going to share a little bit of background information about how he got into the space that he's in. We'll go over what productivity actually means because so many people keep asking me, how do I get my team to be more productive? How can I be more productive? What does that productivity mean? And do we oftentimes confuse just busy work with progress, with growth? We'll talk a little bit about the importance of play at work, intrinsic motivations for how to be more productive, a couple blockers of productivity, and a few other things I wanted to go over, something called NICE goals instead of SMART goals. A lot of people have heard of SMART. Probably a lot of people have not heard of NICE goals. We'll talk about the power of no, recharging, productivity in office versus from home, and hopefully we'll get to a couple other things as well. And at the end of the show, Ali's going to share some of his favorite productivity techniques and tips. So make sure to have a pen and paper handy. Ali, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It should be fun.
Yeah, as I mentioned before we started recording, my team and I, we've followed your YouTube channel for a while. We constantly are perusing through some of the content that you're making on how to grow a YouTube channel. So you do a lot of awesome work. We're big fans. So kudos to you on all the amazing success you've had.
Oh, thanks, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I thought it would be really interesting to start with your background story because you kind of got into this on accident. You didn't start off wanting to become a productivity expert or a content creator or a YouTuber. So what was your path like?
Yeah, so it was kind of windy, and the dots only connect when looking backwards. So at the age of 18, I got into medical school here in the UK. So I went to Cambridge University and I was there for 6 years. Then I graduated at the age of 24. But a year before graduating, I decided to start a YouTube channel. And the reason I started a YouTube channel was actually because I had a side hustle in med school where I was running real life classroom courses where I'd be teaching students how to get into med school. And I really found that I really enjoyed teaching and I wanted to build a business, all that fun stuff. And so in like 2017, 7 years ago, the YouTube channel started as an organic content marketing driver for my business initially. This was before I knew what organic content marketing was. I just thought, hey, if I make videos and people watch them and they think I'm legit, then maybe they'll sign up to one of my courses or whatever. And so I continued running the business, continued the YouTube channel while I worked full-time as a doctor. And then like 2 years into working full-time, I took a break from medicine. Pandemic happened. Lots of things happened around the same time. And I sort of accidentally became a full-time YouTuber. And around that time, people just kept on asking me, like all along the way, how are you so productive? How do you get so much done? How do you do well in school? And also as a doctor while also building a business on the side. And so I sort of accidentally became this allegedly a productivity expert. And now the book's just been published. It says on the front cover that I'm a productivity expert, so I guess I'll take that. But I did not set out to become any kind of productivity guru at all.
Yeah, it's funny how serendipity brings you into the path that you should be focusing on. And for a lot of people out there, productivity is talked about a lot, especially in the corporate world. A lot of leaders are constantly saying, how do I get my employees to be more productive? How can I be more productive? So in the context of the work that you do in the book, what does productivity actually mean? Is it just, how can I work as much as possible? Or what does productivity mean to you?
Yeah, to me, productivity means three things. It's like, how do I do more of the things that matter to me, but in a way that's effective, intentional, and enjoyable? Effective, intentional, and enjoyable. I think if we can get those three things, then we're just winning. Effective meaning, we're doing sensible things, we're working smart. Intentional meaning we are doing the right things, which is like a huge part of productivity, especially productivity in the workplace, especially with teams, is actually just figuring out what are the right things to do. Because when you have infinite options, there are infinitely many bad things to do. And then enjoyable, that's really the core thesis of the book, that if you can make your work feel good, if you can incorporate energizers into it, which we can talk about, then productivity massively boosts when you can experience positive emotions with it. So effective, intentional, and enjoyable.
Yeah, I like those three kind of categories there, which I think make a lot of sense. I also think that a lot of people confuse productivity today, right? I mean, they assume that if they're working more, it means they're productive. But oftentimes, at least what I find, I don't know if you agree, a lot of people are spending a lot of time doing stuff, but they're not moving forward with their goals. They're not moving their business forward. They're not growing. They're just doing a lot of busy work. I sometimes find myself struggling with that as well. So there's a difference between being productive versus just being busy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think what was it Peter Drucker who said this, but that like leadership is doing the right things and managing is doing them right.
Yeah.
Something to that effect. I think a lot of people, when it comes to personal productivity, they're very fixated on the doing things right bit, when they're not thinking at all about like, am I even doing the right things? So yeah, being busy and making lots of progress could be productive, provided you're going in the right direction,
Yeah.
provided you're working on the few things that are going to get you to where you want to go, provided you're working on the bottleneck, for example, rather than something that isn't a bottleneck, which would be a bit of a waste of time. And it's just like things like that. I think people don't often zoom out enough and think about like, what am I actually trying to do? And they just focus on how do I do the thing a little bit faster.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what a lot of people think of as productivity. Now, a lot of productivity discussions have oftentimes been focused on entrepreneurs, right? People who can control their schedule, people who can control their content, they can control the things that they're going to be investing in. But a lot of the people who watch this show and who listen to the podcast are employed full-time in an organization, and either they're trying to figure out how can I be more productive within the confines of the job that I have, the work hours that I'm doing. I have a boss, I have customers. Or I think a lot of leaders are also trying to figure out, how do I get my employees to be more productive as well? How do I get them to do more? So in that kind of context where you're a little bit more limited, do you find that there is still a lot of room for optimization, for becoming more productive, or are you more kind of at the mercy of these external forces?
Yeah, I think in any context, like regardless of how much autonomy we have in that situation, there are so many levers we can pull to be more productive. Even just going through that checklist: intentional, effective, enjoyable. If we start with enjoyable, because that's the whole point of Feel Good Productivity, which is the book, it's like whatever you're doing, even if you're not in control of exactly what you need to do because someone is telling you what you need to do, you can always find a way to make it a little bit more fun. Because when we're having fun, productivity tends to take care of itself. So, for example, back when I used to work as a doctor, I had a post-it note on my computer monitor at all times. And I would think about this a lot when I was at work. I actually have this as a wallpaper on my phone now. It asks the question, what would this look like if it were fun? It's a really simple question. What would this look like if it were fun? Anything that's really boring, back when I had a real job, I'd be writing discharge letters. I'd be doing admin, doing paperwork in the doctor's office. What would this look like if it were fun? Could I bring in a fake potted plant from IKEA and just stick it on my desk in the doctor's office to add a bit more vibes to this place? Could I get a cheap ass Bluetooth speaker from Amazon and just stick it to the ceiling and play instrumental music from The Lord of the Rings while writing my discharge letters? While I'm writing my discharge letters, could I add in a bit of humor, add in a bit of banter? I think a lot of people think that the way you have to do things is in a really boring and corporate way. Like the word corporate is seen as a slur in a lot of circles because it's synonymous with boring. Could you just add a little bit more joy and energy and excitement to the work? It'll benefit everyone. It energizes you because now you're doing something interesting, and it energizes the people you're giving that presentation to because now they're not watching a boring presentation. No one wants to watch a boring presentation. So just that question, what would this look like if it were fun, is a really easy way for anyone in any situation to be more productive, but also to have a better time at work.
Do you want to hear something really crazy? 96% of the people who watch videos on this channel are not subscribed. Help me change that number around by subscribing. Yeah, I think one of the things that you talk about early in the book that I'm looking at here is the importance of play at work. And I feel like there are some organizations or some leaders that are more embracing of that concept and others that are kind of like, this is work, there's no playtime here. So play at work, and I love that even working at a doctor's office, you found a couple simple ways that you can just make things a little bit more fun, more enjoyable. Why do you think play is so important, not just from a productivity standpoint, but also just kind of mentally, right? I mean, it seems like when we're kids, we're constantly playing. I have two kids, a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. They love playing nonstop. But then it seems like the older you get, the more time you spend in a company, the more play is I don't know, educated or taught out of you. And it's like all seriousness from now on, no playing, no laughing, no enjoying yourself. Just do what you got to do. Why is play so important for us on a productivity and also on a mental level?
Yeah. So if we just take an extreme example, like, I've been in a lot of operating theaters where they've been doing like life-saving surgery, like full on extreme end of like this is the important shit. People's lives are literally on balance. Patient is bleeding out right in front of you. I'm
Jeez.
assisting in the operation or observing. The surgeon's doing the stuff. The team is helping. All of that. And even in those life and death situations, the best surgeons realize that actually having an environment that's a little bit light and not so heavy actually improves their performance and their productivity. It doesn't take away from it. And so the best surgeons play background music. They play upbeat music when they're in the middle of an operation. They'll ask to be they'll ask for the music to be switched off in like the absolute critical moments where they have to make that suture and it has to go in right. Then they need to concentrate. But then for the 98% of the operation, they'll have the upbeat background music.
That's
They'll be
crazy.
cracking
Like
jokes while they're
during
doing the routine
surgery,
stuff.
they got,
During surgery, yeah. Because they realize that this creating an environment of lightness and ease, even around life-saving operations, actually improves improves everyone's mood. And we know that when people's mood goes up, their productivity and creativity goes up, their stress levels go down, and they perform at their best. So if any company is thinking like, oh, screw playtime, it's all about work, it's all about seriousness, you're literally like shooting yourself in the foot because like serious and heavy environments do not actually make for optimal performance from anyone's team. And actually finding a way to make your meetings a bit more enjoyable, a bit more energizing, a bit less serious, that's the sort of stuff that really helps boost people's that's the sort of stuff that really helps boost people's productivity.
huh? That's yeah. Well, hopefully after listening to this, people will add a little bit of fun into their work environment. There's also kind of this balance between intrinsic and extrinsic factors, right? So things that you can control as far as your mindset of motivation, and then things that leaders try to do to motivate you to be more productive. And I thought maybe we could take a look at the internal and the external factors. At least on the external factors, it seems like a lot of the things that leaders do, and you can tell me if you agree with this or not, is they try to, incentivize people. We'll give you more money. We'll give you a bonus. We try to come up with these motivation factors to get you to work harder, to be more productive. And I don't know, do you find that those are effective? Like if a leader came to you and said, hey, I'm trying to make my team more productive, would you tell them just offer to pay your people more if they achieve more?
Oh God, absolutely not. There's a really good book by Daniel Pink called Drive,
Yes.
which is about what drives intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation being the motivation where people are doing something because they want to, rather than because there's some sort of reward associated with it. And he cites a bunch of research from a psychological theory called self-determination theory, which is the idea that we are motivated by the feeling of being self-determined, like we're in control of our own lives. And offering to pay people more tends to, that's a very extrinsic motivator. You're saying, I want you to do this task because I will give you money for it.
Yeah.
And you would think that paying someone to do something will improve their performance. And it's true in, according to the evidence, it's true in like rote or menial tasks where it's just about like producing the widget and you just have to do it faster. But as soon as it gets to any kind of creative work, any kind of knowledge work, any kind of work where the person actually needs to use their brain rather than just their hands, paying people for performance doesn't actually work. And in a lot of cases, reduces the intrinsic motivation that people have for their work. And this is like really dangerous because it's so counterintuitive. And like, I'm sure if someone's a business leader or manager, they will have read Drive by Daniel Pink. And if not, you really should, because it just turns all of this stuff on its head. And I think it's a fantastic book for understanding what are the true factors that motivate us intrinsically rather than extrinsically.
And it seems like the intrinsic is far more valuable towards productivity versus the extrinsic. And so probably, I think he talks about autonomy, mastery. Oh man, what was the third thing in there?
Purpose. Yeah.
Autonomy, mastery, purpose. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That's the thing. Yeah. Like intrinsic motivation is much more, it's more durable. It's more long lasting. It's also more powerful and helps people really feel as if they're part of something. Like you don't want, in a dream world, your team wouldn't be coming to work because of the paycheck. In a dream world, they would be coming to work because they enjoy it, because they're using their strengths, because they feel like they're making a difference.
Yep.
Now, obviously that's in a dream world. In the real world, obviously there is some aspect of extrinsic motivation involved here. But like as much as possible, we actually want to try and motivate our people through giving them something meaningful and worthwhile to work towards, helping them use their strengths, and giving them autonomy in their job rather than micromanaging them. And that tends to lead to way more productivity than just offering to pay people more. Although I'm sure no one would say no to an extra
Yeah.
extra bit of money as well.
I think it's also been challenging post-pandemic, right? Because when you're in the office, your leader can see you and they know that you're working. Whereas when you're remote, people can't see you. And a lot of leaders freak out and they wonder, well, is this person working? Is this person actually doing anything? I remember many, many years ago, I used to do telemarketing when I was like 15 or 16. And, in that kind of environment, they basically have these little cubes. The supervisor would sit in the middle of this room and everybody would be in a circle around the supervisor and you'd be making calls and the supervisor, just by turning his head, could just see who's not dialing and who is. And there'd be several times where, my ear would hurt for a second. So I'd like put the phone down and he would immediately, Jacob, why aren't you on the phone dialing? And, he could see whether I'm on the phone or whether I'm not. And in today's environment where so many people are hybrid or remote, leaders can't see that. And they get, I don't know, anxious, worried, freaked out. How can you tell? I mean, what advice do you have for those leaders who can't necessarily see their people working, but are still wanting to know if they're productive? It seems like the outputs matter more than the inputs there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Like this is something I struggle with my team as well. And in the early days, I used to worry about this. I used to think, oh, what if they're not being productive? But I realized over time and through working with a bunch of executive coaches and CEO coaches that like, if you're really concerned about the productivity of your team, then you've got to find the right measurables, the right metrics. The metrics will tell you whether someone's being productive and if they are producing the things they're meant to be producing and those outcomes are working in a way that you want them to work. Who cares whether they're at their desk 24/7 or whether they were like scratching their head for one bit? If they're getting the results that you want from them, then great. If they're not, then we've got a problem and we can think about it. But I think it's a lot less about monitoring inputs and a lot more about, results first. If the results are there, who cares about the inputs really?
Yeah. And I guess that's a mental shift that a lot of people need to make because I mean, how did you make that transition? Because to your point, you were nervous about that for your team. And you obviously you identify these metrics, but it's also a little bit of a mental adjustment, knowing that, hey, I can't see you. I don't know if you're working. I'm paying you as if you're working 40 hours, but maybe you're working 10. How did you get past that mental hurdle?
Yeah, honestly, it still comes up in my mind very occasionally. I'm like, is this person actually working? Over time, as I've gotten to know my team and know them on a personal level, I think whenever you're managing people, there is some level of faith that you just have to like. You can't look over their shoulder all the time. I have friends who use like screen recording software that takes screenshots and all that stuff.
Oh yeah,
and
companies today are even doing that too, right? Tracking keyboard strokes for their employees, and it creates a lot of backlash.
Yeah, it creates so much backlash. I've got friends who work in companies like that, and they have found ways to like jiggle the mouse every 5 minutes or something, or like literally there are these like apps and stuff and like little physical things that can sort of jiggle the mouse and type in random keys on the keyboard in a random interval so that software can't tell that. It's like
wow.
you end up in this really weird like hamster situation where you're treating people like animals, and then they'll sort of rebel against that.
It's funny you mentioned
there is a certain level of faith and trust you need to have in your team.
Yeah, I used to have an acquaintance when I lived in the Bay Area, and he worked at a finance company. And he literally used that phrase because we would talk and I would ask him, are you able to work out? This was during the pandemic when everybody was working from home. And he would, work out in the morning and exercise. And I asked him, I said, don't your employees or do your leaders track whether you're online or whether you're offline? And he says, yeah, I mean, as soon as I wake up in the morning, before I even do anything, I just go, literally, he said, I wiggle the mouse. When he would do his workouts at home, he would literally bring his laptop down there while he was working out and just every like 15 minutes, just literally wiggle the mouse. And it was so funny. We actually made a cartoon about this, I think a year or two ago, called Wiggle the Mouse, where literally if you have that little green notification on whatever platform you're using that says you're available, people think you're working. And as soon as it turns yellow, they're like, oh, where is Jacob? Where is this person? Not at their desk. And you're right. I mean, people will find a way around that. You mentioned you worked with a couple executive coaches and with some people who kind of helped you with that. Was it just kind of a trust thing that you just had to learn to trust your people?
Um, it was less trust and more about like measurables.
Okay.
I
So
remember
once you
saying to
identified the
one of,
metrics.
yeah, exactly. Like it's sometimes quite hard to identify the metrics. And that's why I put off identifying the metrics for such a long time, because I was like, we make content, we make YouTube videos and stuff. Like, we can't control how many views a video gets. So number of views clearly isn't the right metric because it's out of our control.
Yeah.
So like, what do we do? And I was sort of blocked at that particular hurdle. But then I think about 18 months ago, my CEO coach, I said to him, hey, Eric, man, I'm really struggling with this. Like, I don't know what people are up to. Like, I don't know if this person's working or if that person's working, and I just don't really get it. Like, I feel this anxiety. Like, it keeps me up at night, wondering, am I just throwing money down the drain on these employees that might not be doing the work? And he was like, oh, okay, that's a pretty common concern. What does your scorecard look like? And I was like, what scorecard? And he was like, oh, don't you have a scorecard? I was like, what the hell is a scorecard? He was like, where do you track your numbers? I was like, you're supposed to track your numbers? But I can't track views. I do that on YouTube analytics and stuff. And he was like, bro, this is what a scorecard looks like. And he showed me a Google sheet, like a simplified version of a scorecard that had the key metrics for his teams and his various businesses. And I was like, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like. And now we've been managing with a scorecard for 18 months, and it's super effective. People update their numbers every week. They write a little report. If the numbers are off track, they write a little comment inside the Google sheet.
I would love to. Is that something that you're able to share?
Oh, sure, yeah.
I would love to. Maybe we could put that up, and I can do like a little post about that too. I would love to see that scorecard, and maybe we can share that with some leaders out there too. I've been trying to figure something out there too. Maybe I'll use that scorecard as well. So if you're open to sharing it, I think that'd be super cool. People would be interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's
the other thing, just on that note, that we found super helpful is we do we used to have a weekly all hands where people would give updates about what they're working on.
Okay.
But it would take bloody ages. It was super boring. No one would care because people tend not to care about things happening outside of their own department.
Yeah.
What we do now is that with our team of 13 people, everyone writes a weekly update. That is like, what's the one key highlight? What are some major things that happened this week? What are some issues? And at the start of our all hands meeting, we have 10 minutes where we play some background music that's upbeat and fun. And everyone just reads the updates and then comments on the Notion page or the Google Doc. And that is such an effective way of just me and our general manager and everyone in the team just getting up to date on what everyone is up to without having to spend an hour and a half in a meeting just going through it point by point. And that also massively adds to the trust because it's not just about blind faith now. It's about, I can actually see what the updates are every week. And damn, this is good. Good things are happening.
How big is your team?
We've got 13 full-time and like 10 or so freelancers / part-time me type people.
Interesting. Can you share a little bit more about how you run your meeting? Because I think that's very interesting. A lot of leaders tend to do that exact approach, right? They just do an all-hands meeting. Everybody shows up. They talk about what they're working on. Maybe people share their challenges and stuff like that. I think it was Amazon, right? They do something where they have, I don't know if it's necessarily a meeting, but it's, if you want to pitch an idea, you kind of have to write like a 1 or 2 page white paper, and then everybody reads it at the beginning of the meeting, kind of a similar approach, and then people debate it. When you're running your meetings with your team, so I like that approach of doing the update where you do the highlights, everybody puts it in a Google Doc, everyone comments on there. What do you spend the rest of the time during that meeting on?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the meeting format is an amalgamation of 2 things. Number one is Matt Mashari's stuff. He's a CEO coach that your listeners might be familiar with. He's written a great book called The Great CEO Within. And he also has like this open source Google Doc, which is like the ultimate Bible for how to run a business. And he has some very specific guidance in that Google Doc about how to run meetings. And if, this idea of getting people to read the updates for 10 minutes is, well, I mean, I don't know if he came up with the idea, but that's where I got it from. And then the rest of our meeting structure is based on a book called Traction, the EOS system by Gino Wickman, which is a very specific like structure for running a meeting, where we have issues or awarenesses, as we call them. They're all in a database. Once we've done our 10 minutes of updates, we'll go around, sharing some wins for about 5 minutes, personal and professional wins, just to get that good energy in. And then we'll spend the rest of the meeting discussing issues or discussing awarenesses, and trying our best to sort of focus the meeting on collaborative brainstorming rather than just updating people. Because updates are boring, like no one likes them, but people love to be involved in some sort of collaborative brainstorming. So if we have an issue like, hey, our offer isn't converting as well as it once was, we'll throw it out to the team being like, all right, guys, here is the problem. Here's the issue. Like the offer conversion rate is like 1%, whereas this time last year it was 2%. Like here are what we think are the factors that have contributed to this problem. What are some solutions? And we'll give it like a few minutes. And again, people will write down, this is a shared Google Doc or Notion page. And the way we get everyone involved is by just getting everyone to write things down. Because otherwise you're going around individuals, like you're like, anyone got any ideas? And then no one's speaking up and it feels like pulling teeth.
Yep.
If you get people to write, all right, guys, everyone's got 3 minutes. Here's some music. Let's write down, write down anything you can think of. That sort of collaborative approach to meetings, we've found super helpful in getting the ideas out. And then the people that are just less likely to speak up in meetings, they're all happy to write things out. And then it's really obvious if someone's like not contributing. So then people are like, shit, I need to contribute. And we get really good ideas that way.
And this is anybody can contribute, even if it's outside of their area of expertise. So in your case, if you're creating a product and you're trying to figure out why something isn't performing well, I would imagine the main people who would want to be commenting on that are, people who are designing landing pages, people who are designing copy, but you also have people who are not doing anything related to that particular offer. Do they speak up as well and share their ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like often the best ideas will come from people that are outside of that main thing, provided the person responsible for the issue has defined it appropriately. Because you should really be able to explain a problem in a way that like a kid can understand. If you really understand it, you'll be able to explain it in a way that a layperson could understand it. And therefore, a layperson could say, have you thought about doing X or Y or Z? And you'll be like, huh. I mean, it's not quite possible because they don't quite understand the limitations of this platform, but it's a good suggestion. And actually, that prompts me to think about this other way that we could do it that is possible. And so we get a lot of cool ideas that way from people who are not within the department where the issue is happening.
Very interesting. This actually transitions well to the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, which is seeking clarity. And at least one of the things that I find is a challenge frequently, and I experience this sometimes with my team as well, is that one of the reasons why productivity sometimes suffers or you're not able to achieve a goal is because it's not clearly articulated as far as what the expectations are, what the result needs to be, having a scorecard, for example. So how do you recommend people get clarity? I mean, let's say we can look at this from two different angles, right? I'm an employee. I'm working for a particular leader. What are some of the questions that I as an employee should be asking to make sure that I am meeting my productivity goals? Like what should I be looking for from my leader?
Yeah, sure. So there's a few ways of going about this. I think the main one is to understand the intent behind the thing that's being asked. Because a leader might often be like, hey, can you do this thing? And what they don't actually want the thing. What they want is like some second order downstream effect of the thing, whatever the thing might be. But if you don't know what that thing is, they might phrase the request in a weird way. They might like not really know what they want. So honestly, the first step is to ask why, not in like a, mean way, but just like, what's the goal here? Like, what is this trying to serve? Because then you probably know more about your specific work than the leader does because they're busy and have other things going on.
Yeah.
And so you might well be able to come up with a better way of getting at the result that the leader wants, even though it's not specifically the thing that they've asked you to do. That's one way of doing it. The other way I really like is from a book called Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. Amazing book. Everyone should read it.
Buy Back Your Time.
Buy
I'm
Back Your
writing
Time.
these things down.
It's like officially a book about how to delegate stuff, but it's also a really good book about how to sort of respond when stuff is delegated to you. And there's an idea he talks about, which is the DOD, the definition of done. And we've incorporated this into our team now as well, like over a year ago, where if I ask someone in the team for something, often they will reply with, what's the DOD? What's the definition of done? And a DOD has three things. It's got the three Fs: facts, feelings, and functionality. Facts, what are the facts? Like, what do I expect to see? Feelings, how do I want to feel, or how do we, or the customer or the team want to feel when this thing is done? And functionality, what does the fact that this thing is being done allow us to then do that we couldn't do before? And when someone asks me, what's the DOD? I'm like, oh, now you're making me think. And then I have to think about it. And it's really helpful for me to think about it because 30% of the time, I might realize in the process of thinking about it and thinking about it out loud with a team member that actually this thing doesn't actually need to be done because there is a better way, or we're already doing it, or we don't need to do it at all. And the other 70% of the time, when we do define a DoD, facts, feelings, and functionality, it gives the team members so much clarity of like, oh, this is what I'm trying to get to, which is just not the sort of thing that most people ask their bosses because they're worried about like, oh, I don't want to disturb them. I don't want to look like an idiot. But actually asking for more clarification and more clarity is almost always a very useful thing to do.
If you enjoy getting leadership and career advice and trying to figure out how to future-proof your organization, you are not going to want to miss heading over and subscribing to my Substack, which you can do by going to greatleadership.substack.com. We have a community there of tens of thousands of people from around the world, and it's where I share my latest thinking, my best ideas, exclusive interviews with CEOs, in-depth articles and insights that I share, and leadership hacks from some of the world's top leaders and best-selling authors. So if you want to really step up your leadership game, excel in your career, head over to greatleadership.substack.com. You are not going to want to miss this opportunity. I think I struggle with that sometimes too. I realize that after hearing you talk, sometimes I don't do like I ask for something or I'll expect something, but I don't communicate what I'm really looking for kind of 2-3 layers down. And so people might give me the widget or give me the article or give me the video or whatever it is, and assume that that's kind of what I'm looking for, but without understanding kind of the deeper 2 layers down. Like I'm looking for a video that's going to convert. I'm looking for a video, or I'm looking for an article that's going to drive people here instead of just the fact that I'm looking for an article. So similarly, I think in terms of a lot of businesses, when a lot of leaders ask their employees for something, they can do a better job of communicating, here's what I'm really looking for. There's the output versus the thing itself. And oftentimes we just focus on the thing itself and not what we want the outcome to be.
Yeah, man, that's so true. Just like on that note, I just had a thought. What was that thought? Oh, it was going to be a good one. Hold on, give me 5-10 seconds. Let me think about this. One thing you were saying, it just sparked from something that you said. The team clarity is giving more information. What's the point? Oh, yes, this. One technique that I learned in relationship therapy, which really applies to businesses as well, that I now say to my team all the time, is that whenever anyone is upset or annoyed or angry, it is always because one of their needs has not been met. And I think this really applies in the world of business as well, like in the world of work. And the thing I say to my team is, whenever I, as the boss, am asking anyone a question, there is always an underlying need beneath that question. Like, I don't just ask questions for the fun of it. Unless it's like, hey, how you doing? Casually. But if I'm asking a question about the work, it's like, hey, what's the progress on that project we're working on? They could just give me a progress update, but that would actually be not the right way to answer that question. The right way to answer that question would be, very happy to give you a progress update, but I'd love to ask, what are you missing? Or why do you ask? And then I'd be like, oh, I'm asking because I feel like I haven't had an update in a while, and I'm a bit like concerned that like this is going off track. And they might be like, oh, with respect, have you seen the update that we put in Slack 2 days ago with an accompanying Loom video? And I'd be like, oh, no, I haven't. In that case, don't worry about it. I'll go and watch that. And now that person has just saved a bunch of work, and that person has saved a bunch of anxiety because they'd be like, oh, why is Ali, the boss, asking this question? And by just trying to understand the need that I was feeling behind the question, they've been able to just not have to do extra work for no reason. And I'm also now like, oh, whoops, my bad. It's my fault for not reading the update rather than their fault for not sending it. Yeah. So it completely kind of changes the, instead of me thinking this person's incompetent, I now think, hey, I've screwed up. And that's a very good place to be if your boss thinks that they're incompetent rather than that you're incompetent.
Yeah. What role do you see yourself playing? Because a lot of and this is one of the things I struggle with, I've talked to a lot of leaders that struggle with this, is kind of being the bottleneck, right? But, I'm a content creator, you're a content creator. So my challenges are different than, for example, somebody who's running a marketing or a sales team. But some of my challenges at least are, let's say we're writing articles or doing videos or coming up with titles or thumbnails, is I constantly want to review and see everything. What's the title? What's the description? What does the hook look like? And so everything ultimately funnels through me because I have, I don't know, certain expectations or a subjective way that I view something. And same thing if you're in sales or marketing or customer service, you might be leading your team and people talk to customers in a certain way or respond to emails in a certain way, but you want it done your way, right? You have the ultimate ownership. And so how do you, what role do you view a leader playing? Are you supposed to be, looking at everything and reviewing it, or do you just kind of trust people and if they make a mistake, you let them go with it? Do you know what I mean? Like, especially if you're the owner of something, it's very tempting to want to have your tentacles in every aspect of what gets created, what your employees say, how they communicate with customers, the relationships that they build, how they build it, how they present themselves, how they represent you. And it becomes very suffocating. And one of the things that I struggle with, at least, is I find that I spend a lot of time, and I'm sure leaders spend a lot of time, not necessarily focusing on the strategy aspect of the business, but bogged down with reviewing stuff before it officially goes out. So you have a team of, I think you said 10 or 13 plus 10 or whatever contractors, which is the size of most teams inside of an organization. And so as the leader of that team, what role do you view that you have in that team?
Yeah, man, this is a tricky one. I think especially in like content businesses where, my videos are coming out under my name. It's like literally my name on the line, rather than a company name, for example. So this is a constant area of struggle. The way I think of it is that there are certain areas in which I want to be a bottleneck and certain areas in which I absolutely do not want to be a bottleneck. And in areas where I am a bottleneck, we are going to do whatever we can to make me not a bottleneck. Because when the leader is the bottleneck, it like causes problems for everyone. It slows everything down, puts a limitation on your growth. Everyone's annoyed because like you have this backlog of requests and reviews that you need to do, and then people's work gets blocked, and then they feel like they lose autonomy and they lose mastery and they lose purpose because their work is being blocked. All sorts of bad problems happen when there is blockage in the system.
Yep.
There is. Have you come across a book called The Goal?
The Goal. Let me look it up on Amazon.
Who is it by? I read this a couple of weeks ago.
Is it called The Process of Ongoing Improvement? The Goal?
Yes, by Eliyahu Goldratt.
Yeah, I see it here. Oh, wow. It's an old book, more than a decade
It's really
ago.
old. It's really freaking good. There is an analogy in here that we've been using. Like, I read this book 2 weeks ago, and I told the analogy to my team, and we've already made changes to our business because of this analogy. The analogy is that there's this guy who is like leading an expedition of kids. He's like a dad, and one of his kids is on an expedition. He's like leading the expedition, and his job is to get the kids from A to B, complete the hike. And he finds that they keep on being like held back by this one fat kid called Herbie. And Herbie's got this big ass backpack on his shoulders, and Herbie's at the back of the line, and then this guy's trying to get Herbie to run a bit more, and then Herbie's going out of breath, and like the whole group of kids is like getting fractured and etc. etc. And he realizes after a while that like Herbie is the bottleneck. Like the group is only as fast as its slowest member because the goal is for the whole group to get to the finish line and not just individuals. And he tries a few things here and there, and this guy runs a factory, like a manufacturing factory, and he realizes that this Herbie and kid expedition analogy is exactly the problem he's having in his production line. And he realizes that what he has to do is put Herbie at the front so that everyone is limited by Herbie's progress. And then what they have to do is get the backpack off of Herbie, like get rid of his soda cans and give it to the other kids. And they have to put shoes on Herbie. They have to give Herbie wings. And the idea of giving Herbie wings is not in the book, but it's how I've been talking about it with my team. So I'm the bottleneck. For example, like, all of the YouTube videos have to be made by me. I do the podcast, etc., etc. I am the fat kid. I am Herbie in this analogy. And the whole team is being held up by the fact that I am Herbie at the front. And so the question I've been saying to my team is, how do we get the backpack off of me? And then how do we give me wings as the bottleneck? And so the way we take the backpack off is by getting rid of stuff in my calendar that doesn't need to be there. Instead of me reviewing website articles as the first person, they should be reviewed by 2 other people in the team who can catch the easy mistakes so that maybe I'm the final reviewer. Maybe we hire an editor who understands my voice really well. So the editor is the one who reviews website articles before they go out so that I become less of a bottleneck. And in terms of adding wings, for the last 7 years, I've been filming videos just by myself, and it's been, I've kind of gotten used to it. I know how to film videos. But literally today, I filmed 2 videos, and I got one of my team members, my YouTube producer, to be on a Zoom call with me, feeding me questions. Because I'm way better at answering questions than I am just sort of filming in my own on my own in my bedroom. And I said to him, like, it was like midday today, "Hey Tintin, I've just had an idea. I've got an idea that can give Herbie wings. And I think if you were to ask me questions, that would make it easier to film this video." And it made it way easier to film the video. And now we're like, whoa, 7 years of making YouTube videos, we're on 5 million subscribers, and we've never thought to have a producer on the other end of the line asking me questions. Because I'm really good at answering questions. I just suck at making videos because it feels really hard. So what are all the things we can do to give Herbie wings? And so coming back down, this bottleneck analogy, how do you make the person who is the bottleneck less of a bottleneck?
Yeah.
And I think the role of a leader is to identify the bottleneck and sort of do whatever the hell they can to alleviate the fact that that's a bottleneck.
Yeah, and I really like that you said that it's okay to be the bottleneck in some things, but not in all things. So, maybe you are, at least in content, the bottleneck in some spaces, but you're not the bottleneck in all the other areas where other people can kind of take ownership of it. So probably the first step that any leader needs to figure out, again, whether you're in sales or marketing or HR, is to identify what are all the different areas where you're the bottleneck. And then what are the things that are crucial for you to actually be the bottleneck for versus what are things that people can have ownership of. So maybe if you're in HR, maybe other people are helping review the policies and reviewing some of the performance reviews and all that sort of stuff. And like you said, then it comes to you afterwards as a final check instead of you being the one to actually go through and develop the policies and review the performance appraisals and stuff like that. Or if you're in customer service, maybe other people can come up with the scripts and how they might want to respond to customers, and other people review it. And then it comes to you as kind of a final check instead of you being the one that's sitting there and trying to figure out what should that whole script and process look like. So I like that approach because we always assume that being a bottleneck is bad. But it sounds like what you're saying is being a bottleneck isn't bad if you're the bottleneck for the right things.
Yes,
if the things are driving the business and they're making the biggest impact on your business, you should, as the leader, be the bottleneck of those things. But if something is kind of periphery, it's okay to give that to somebody else.
Yeah, it's like there is always a bottleneck. Just like by definition, there is always a bottleneck with any process. And identifying where that bottleneck is helps you figure out what actions to take next. When the leader stops being a bottleneck with HR procedures, great. But there will be another bottleneck. Yeah. And then the job of the leader is to find that bottleneck. It might be in sales, it might be in marketing, it might be in onboarding, it might be in client retention. There is always a bottleneck, and it's worth, and in a way, that is, at least according to this book, that's how you figure out what to work on next. You're like, cool, where are we trying to go? What is the one thing that's most stopping us from getting there? What is the bottleneck to our growth? And therefore, we know what we need to do. Let's fix the bottleneck. And that's how business grows. You just keep fixing bottlenecks after bottlenecks after bottlenecks after bottlenecks, and you grow.
One thing that I wanted to touch on before we get into some of your favorite productivity techniques, I guess we have a couple options, and I'll let you pick which one you want to go to. One, I thought we could either talk about the main blockers to productivity, or NICE goals, the power of saying no, recharging or productivity at the home versus the office. If you had to pick one of those topics to wrap up, which one do you think?
Yeah, let's talk about the blockers. I think blockers are fun.
Okay. So what are the main productivity blockers for people out there?
Yeah, so one of them we've already touched on. The first one is uncertainty, which is where you don't have clarity over what you're doing, when you're doing it, and why you're doing it. Anytime someone's struggling with procrastination, the first question I ask is, what are you actually trying to do? And then they're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm trying to do blah, 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 blah. And then I'll say, okay, do you have it on your calendar? The answer is usually no. And then the answer is usually, oh yeah, that's a good point. I'll put it in my calendar. Putting something in the calendar is just a surefire way of making it way more likely that it'll get done. So that's how you can break the blocker of uncertainty. But then there are two other blockers that can get in people's way. One is the blocker of fear. So often procrastination is like an emotional problem rather than a tactical problem. And usually there's some sort of fear of judgment, fear of self-doubt, fear of what other people will think that's holding us back in some way. Obviously, hard to kind of clarify that over a podcast episode or even a book. That takes a long time to fully get over fear. But recognizing when it's fear that's holding us back and being able to name that fear and writing it down, that like, oh, I am not asking for that raise. I've been procrastinating on asking for that raise because I am afraid I will be laughed out of the room. Okay, that's good. It's good self-awareness. Now we can work on that. Whereas, I've been procrastinating from asking for that raise and I don't really know why. It's like, if you don't diagnose the problem, it's very hard to find the appropriate treatment path for it. And then the final blocker is inertia. Like everything we do requires some amount of upfront effort. And that is where discipline, willpower, grit, all of these things come in. I'm not a fan of like living life relying on discipline. And if every time you go to the gym, you have to use discipline to get yourself through the workout, that's a pretty painful way to live and you're going to burn out fairly quickly. It's okay to use discipline to get yourself to go to the gym, but then once you're there, you kind of want to focus on enjoying the process. And so inertia is that activation energy that every task takes. And so my favorite strategy for dealing with that is the 5-minute rule. If you're struggling with procrastination from something, just tell yourself you're just going to do it for 5 minutes. And generally, once you do it for 5 minutes, you'll find that, actually, it's kind of fun. I want to keep going with this.
So kind of messing with your brain there a little bit.
Absolutely.
Very, very clever. So let's talk a little bit about some of your favorite productivity techniques. And this is a section of the podcast that we call the Leader's Toolkit. We'll spend maybe 15 minutes or so on this.
Sure.
And this is kind of the tactical stuff. And I can share some of the things that I've done. I'd love to hear some of the things that you have done. And again, for me, it's a little bit different, right? I'm a content creator. I set my own schedule. I have a small team of people that I work with, so I don't have a boss that's hanging over me. But I struggled a lot with, being able to get things done. And I don't say I have a perfect process, but I've improved a lot. And so some of the things that have been most helpful for me is I try not to do any meetings on Monday, Wednesdays, or Fridays, none at all. And so, for example, after this podcast, I'm done for the rest of the day. I try not to do any meetings before 10 a.m. So I exercise in the morning and then I'm kind of set for the day. I also try to batch tasks. I know that's one of the things that you talk about in the book as well. So I try to batch tasks together. I try not to, stare at social media all day. It can be an endless time suck. But even with that, right, sometimes I still even struggle with trying to find the time to do everything that I want to do. So many things that I want to get to that I don't find that I have time to get to. So those are some of the things that I've implemented. For you, and again, a lot of people listening and watching this have jobs inside of organizations. So they can't say, for example, I'm not going to have a meeting on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Their boss is going to say, what are you talking about? You gotta show up to this all hands meeting. You can't say no. So what are your favorite productivity techniques? All right, my conversation with Ali Abdaal continues for subscribers of Great Leadership Plus on Apple Podcasts. And you're not going to want to miss this bonus conversation because Ali is going to be sharing some of his favorite productivity techniques, including focusing on what matters, doing one thing at a time, a technique he calls Don't Empty the Waiting Room. He's going to share 5 questions that he asks every morning and something that he does almost at the end of every week called a weekly review. We're going to be talking about all those techniques and a couple others. Again, only available for subscribers of Great Leadership Plus on Apple Podcasts. And when you subscribe, you'll get access to a bonus episode every week, as well as ad-free listening for those full podcast episodes. I also invite you to join our Substack community. This is actually where I share all the episodes. This is where I share articles, things that I'm working on. You get access to all of my latest content and best thinking. There is a free and a paid version available. If you want to get access to that, go to greatleadership.substack.com/GL podcast to get 20% off of the subscription, or just enter your email and subscribe for the free version there too. And lastly, grab a copy of my latest book, Leading with Vulnerability, at leadwithvulnerability.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please send it to somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. I'll see you next time.